This is just a little slideshow about me trying to get to the next level with showing depth in uh, the larger polymer work that I've been doing. So I did some watercolors just to kind of like open up my head, and I'm like, wow, this is in the sky, and then I got to the trees. I'm like, this is so complex. It, like, how do you show something that has several different layers of complication? And that is like the essence of what makes it look really beautiful. The clouds were my first attempt, and primarily I have been working like I have either a background or I'm working right on wax paper, and I'm taking pieces of veneer and laying them out like one piece at a time. So I'm sort of building a design. But the complexity of a cloud, you think about these puffy layers that are like seeming to come towards you. I felt like it's much too hard to fit those shapes around each other. So I started I made the original shape, but then I started cutting pieces out and putting more pieces in. And then with the trees, I did the same thing. So I was looking at all the color variations and all the leaves, but also thinking about all the shadows that go back in on a tree. And that is really, you know, that I'm just starting to get like this. I would say I have like 2 levels of depth in it, but possibly 3 if you count like the dark mountains in the background. So here was my quest. I am in love with Queen Anne's lace, and it is such a, I've loved it since I was really little. Queen Anne's lace, you know, there's a bajillion little flowers, and I've had this idea about making really big flowers, basically taking weeds and things that are wildflowers that are not super special in a way, but making them really big to have us look at something very small and make it more important. How to do this. So, and I really like the feeling, like when I was a kid, I used to hold them up like an umbrella, you know, and look up into them. And so I was thinking about, how do I show this thing that goes back and then all these different petals? So, and I know that I'm not going to get every single petal, but how do I even indicate this kind of complexity? So I started with photographs that I had, and I then did a sketch and blew it up. So this is, I put it, but I did blow this up, print it out on different, numerous pieces of paper. But here's what I was getting at, you know, so this is one floweret. So what I'm going to show you is how I'm doing one floweret and how that then expanded into something bigger, and how each one of these had multiple layers of so it looks like you're looking back in my, and so you can see, I really, since I started working in jewelry, I started really thinking about components more than building one thing, but working in smaller units. And honestly, it's a lot easier for my back and for working on a large scale, that it's hard to be working on something really big all the time. And it's also how I sort of comprehend it now, is like break it down, zone in on one thing, and then put it all back together. So this is kind of how the thing was going to emerge. And each floweret is sitting on a piece of wax paper. So this is the basic idea. The first thing is that I have this blue background, and that in of itself is actually 2 layers. And the one layer is this sort of sky blue. So I started out with just like a blue oval. And then I got my handy dandy little petal cutter, not very exciting, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to sort of turn this into a pattern, and I'm just going to keep using this petal cutter. And what I did is I made a Skinner blend that went from pretty pure white and then to pearl, and then to a very light gray. So I was trying to show some shadowing in each little flower. So what I did is I started out with the sky, and then it's subtractive in that I took my petal cutter and cut out these areas, and I used a gouge, one of my carving or little linoleum cutter gouge, to indicate where the branches were going to come up. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 flowers started, but I know that I want some petals to look like they're coming further on top of that. So first I start with the base layer, and there's my gouge. And then I also was using a Skinner blend even on the little stems, because I want that feeling of shadow. So it's like painting, but trying to paint with the clay. So then I was laying in little strips to be like the stems. And so that's what it looks like. Here it is after I put wax paper over it and burnished it. And obviously it cleans a lot up. But when this is on a really big piece, a lot of that detail has kind of a painterly feeling about it. Sort of now I have essentially the feeling of 3 layers, because the sky has like a deep background layer. It'll have sort of a floaty layer over it. And then the 3rd layer is all these stems and petals. What I did with each one of them was cut out more petals, still thinking about shadow, and added them on top, and then added the little center. This is getting more and more gestural. It's less and less exactly like a Queen Anne's lace. Here you can see how I was laying them all out. Now I've done 2 sets of these big Queen Anne's laces. And I actually learned something in the process about fussing with this 2nd layer of detail. This is kind of what it looks like before it's fired. And I have added more stems in there as well. Here I had each blue oval and cut out the little petals. I saved all those little pieces of blue and I used them to fill in all the spaces in between the flowers. And you'd think it would look really blotchy, but it actually has a really interesting sort of, reminds me of woodcuts or sort of painterly effect. Here you can see I've been laying on that 2nd layer of flowers. So it starts to make like, it feels, and then some stems are on the top layer too, going over some of the flowers. So now you start to feel like things are dropping back. So I think that is pretty much it before I fired it. That's what it looked like once it was fired. And you can see how it has sort of a pebbly surface, and it starts to give this feeling of like, there's something back there. It's sort of sky-like, but it's not super defined, like an unfocused, like a photo where you're focused on the front, but the back is sort of more undefined. The top layer on, because one of the problems with this is that once I put that sort of raised layer on there, I couldn't really burnish it and smooth it out, or, get the lint off of it very easily, because there's all these little sections of raised petals. So I realized I could fire this whole first section and then come back and fire the next layer on it. And it was much easier to work with. I used to put 2 layers, like a scrap layer underneath. And that actually is really hard to do subtractive with, because I'm always trying not to pick up the under layer. So I only work 1 layer thick now. It's like a 32nd of an inch. It's like a number 5 on my pasta machine. If it goes, 1 is the thickest and 6 is the thinnest. So here you can see that this flower, it's fired. And then now I'm laying on those petals and the little like stamen type things, and it was so much easier to work with. I could take this this flower, and like move it around, and I could actually cut down on the surface and not mar it. So that was a real revelation for me. So that's what the 2 flowers look like. And I love the way all the sky, you can see the way the sky kind of clears out in between the stems, and just has this sort of almost watercolor effect that basically I can't plan it, because I cannot see that translucent layer over the blue. I can't really see where the white is until it's fired. So it's really kind of fun to watch the reveal. So the seed head was even harder than the flower. I thought the flower was hard. I'm like, how on earth do you show this kind of depth and complexity? So I started out with the same idea, except that I actually made the full circle of the background and sky. And then I started carving and laying in all the green lines. All these little seed pods, I was trying to figure out how to indicate those. So I've just been using a circle cutter to kind of give that feeling of all these little seeds in there. And then this was the first one I did. So this was the first try. And I went ahead and added that next layer on top of it, but I also was using darker clay, so it looks like it's closer to, I love it. I'm just like, how many more little dots can I add to just keep giving this feeling of really full complexity and lots of little seeds and texture? Because it kind of becomes more textural. It's glued down to a 1/4 inch piece of plywood. So bless my husband's heart, he is actually cutting these out very in a lot of detail once it's been glued down to the wood. So then after that fired, you can see how all that blue is really kind of chewy, chunky background look, which gives a real feeling of depth, I feel. And then I added the that top layer, and it was so much easier to work with after the bottom layer was fired. And then this is just kind of for fun. You can see I'm still using the cutouts from the petals to fill in around this little bud. Then the stem, and then this is what it looks like once it's fired. So I had to make these lift off the wall, which gives it a sculptural feel that we've never had with work before. Here's the finished piece, and I think that's it. Oh, nope, here's another close-up look. You really get to see how thick it is. And after we glue it to the wood, I painted the edge, but there you really see the dimension. So that is sort of the finished effect. And adding and then subtracting and then adding back in felt really different to me, as just like how you get this just like delicious layers of kind of like, wow, there's so much in that flower. That's what the,
And
they're about 7 foot tall, yeah.
They're giant, and when you're in them, you just feel like you're Alice in Wonderland shrunk down. They're fabulous.